Hey guys, Omar here, and the 56mm 1.2 and the 16mm 1.4. I can't believe I said that without messing up. These two lenses are arguably the best lenses that arguably, which means you will argue. These two lenses are two of the best options that Fujifilm offers. And I recently went out to New York City with my friend Moe, and we did some street photography, and my goal was simple. I was going to shoot everything in Acros film simulation and just bring two lenses, the 16 and the 56. Now, to cover a couple of things right away, number one, why not carry around a zoom range, like a zoom lens, like the 16 to 55 millimeter 2.8 by Fujifilm? That's a great, fantastic lens that's sharp, is versatile. And the two main reasons are lenses have, a lot of photographers have favorite lenses because they just have an overall quality. It's kind of like focal length to sharpness to the amount of bokeh, and just all that added up gives you a general quality. So the 16mm 1.4 lens has that quality, and the 56 is just like one of the best lenses. It's not just about focal length. That's one thing to understand. Also, bottom line, shooting with primes is fun. Part of the fun is going out and shooting with a specific focal length and forcing yourself to make photographs that work within these two ranges. You're going to see that I fail. I fail every now and then, and so I'll show you my process as I was walking around the street, what worked, what didn't work. And lastly, why Acros film simulation? Well, it's something you should try if you haven't tried. Shooting black and white photography allows you to focus more on the tones of a photograph, the grays, the blacks, and the whites in a photograph, and just looking more at shapes and things. Get rid of all the color, which can be a distraction. But you should shoot JPEG and RAW because there was one photograph, there's probably two photographs that I'll show you that I was just like completely torn back and forth. And maybe you guys can let me know which is better. But let's go through the photographs and I'll tell you my thought process, my failures, my successes, and why I talk like Jim Carrey. Alrighty then. By the way, just an aside, people have asked me that. I was a huge Jim Carrey fan. Ace Ventura, I watched that movie 4,000 times. And I would imitate Jim Carrey as a young guy in my 20s. I would imitate him so much that then when it was over, the Jim Carrey craze, I was I was still doing, hey there, alrighty then. Okay, a good look at the Acros film simulation. So I'll put my settings on the screen again, and I'll just double check what they are on the camera and how the highlights look. And if you zoom in on an Acros photograph, you got really nice grain and tones. Don't go in too much on a Fuji file because it gets all crazy. Now, some of the settings, by the way, you'll see some of my ISOs don't make any sense for shooting out in the daytime. You should be at 200, 400. But I've been experimenting with higher ISOs for my JPEGs. You get some really cool, interesting grain. So much so that if you shot in daylight at 3200, 6400, you start to get a little bit of kind of like a film grain. The noise actually looks good. For example, this photograph, I was shooting at 1600 ISO, and this gentleman was jogging, so I got a little bit of motion here. But you can kind of see, look at the kind of noise / grain that you get. But here, tones. Look, this is kind of two worlds. Here we have the highlights coming in. Here we have the shadows over here. And so this is the 16mm street. And here's the 56. Oh, here's a picture of my buddy Moe. And here my ISO is lower, 200, to show a cleaner file, a nice clean file. And those of you that don't know the real Acros film, it was a lower ISO film. And so it had less grain, as opposed to like Kodak Tri-X, which was very grainy. Going back to the 16, here we're showing different tones again. And by the way, I did cheat a little bit, and I brought out with a gradient here. I brought out these shadows of these like banners that were hanging because this was completely dark. For the most part, you always expose for the highlight. I recommend exposing for the highlight instead of the shadows because the shadows are always easier to recover. Now let me explain this picture. So I saw this scene, and this completely spoke to me because New York in the morning has this funky garbage smell. Like on garbage nights, it's got this really horrible throw-uppy juice that comes and runs from all the garbage cans. You could see all the the juice coming over here. And this poor gentleman is, he's cleaning up. However, the 16 millimeter here is just gathering way too much information. I'm shooting from above on the High Line in New York, and it just doesn't really work. This photograph would work if he was near the trash so it could tell a story, near the gross drippage, but it doesn't really tell a story here. So I slapped on the 56 millimeter 1.2, and again, it didn't work. And so this is where a zoom lens, where you kind of maybe could have gotten a middle ground, would work. So sometimes shooting both extremes will limit you. And so I felt that that happened in this situation. And this was a complete fail. There was no photograph in my mind, unless I would have stood there maybe a little longer. But I didn't get anything here. And that's important. It's important to learn from your failures. Maybe if he fell on this hose or something and like, you know, the drippage on his face, that might have worked. Okay, the 16 millimeter can take an overall scene here, but this really isn't artistic by any stretch of the imagination. It's just like a nice historical shot of the Samsung sign here. I feel like for the 16, it didn't work here. So I slapped on the 56 millimeter just to start looking at tones and shapes. And it was nice. The light was coming out from above this building here. But still, the angle wasn't what I kind of wanted, but this works for me. Like, this would be a nice architectural photograph. But this is the one where I moved to the other side of the building and from across got a shot of it here where there's a lot of lines. There's different tones in the window. So I like this a little bit more. So again, juggling between 16 and 56. Total fun. Here's one where I looked to the left and I thought that the 16 would work better. So I slapped the 16 on. Shooting, I shouldn't have shot this at 1.4. I don't know what I was thinking, but I don't know why. Sometimes you get like 1.4 happy, you just park it there and don't move it. So that was dumb. But here, there's a little bit of a scene. There's cabbies down here in the corner, and there's just you know, you can explore. Your eye can explore this photograph. And look for things, you know, like this water tower that's kind of deformed up here. There's a water tower up here. There's a little guy with a bag. Okay, the 16 millimeter 1.4, for some reason I shot it at 2.5 this time. Again, probably should have shot at f8 here, but I knew this little gap in this building was interesting. I could see stairs, I could see tones, the light coming through here is nice. But at 16, I tried it there, and here I was trying balance with this. But again, the 16 wasn't working. I can't get any closer, by the way, here. So I slapped on the 56 just to draw in that window. You see that little window in the background there? Let me put these two together so we can compare. So here we have the 16 on the left and the 56 on the right. So the 56 just brings in that window from the background nice and close. And so that gives you, you know, this one has a little bit more interest to me than this one has just way too much information and has less of a composition that works. The 16 to me here works. There's great tones. And then I slapped on the 56 and made Moe walk there. And again, here, gosh, look at the Acros film simulation, how nice it works with the tones and everything. If you haven't gone out and shot just with Acros or Acros, I highly recommend you do it. Okay, let me show you the difference between the lenses and what they're doing here. The 16... just, you know, it probably would have been cool if I put Moe in there as well to compare, but I didn't do it. But look at the windows. The windows in here are, you know, within the little, this little awning thing that's here. And here the compression brings the windows above. So the lens will completely change what you're trying to do. By the way, this was one to me that worked in color. Here I toned it. And the building and the little sidewalk here match, and they sort of have like a complementary color going with this orange. So I thought that this kind of worked in color, although I like the black and white. I wasn't as torn as you'll see later in other photos. All right, newspaper delivery, something that's dying in New York. So I saw this paper and I thought, you know, with the internet and all of us reading our news online, this is going to be something in the past, you know, someone getting their New York Post right at their doorstep. But this photograph has too much bokeh. Stop with the over bokeh, people. Sometimes shooting at 1.2 makes no sense, especially if you're close to something like the newspaper. There's no information here whatsoever, except it's a newspaper that's kind of blurry. So here we go from 1.2, and here I stopped. Just stopping down to 2.8 gets you to gets the newspaper a little bit more in focus. And here I thought there just isn't any environment in the photograph. So I moved to the 16 millimeter. I said, you know what? Let's show more of the street. Let's show the delivery. Let's show the door even, because here you can't even see what the door is doing. So the 16 worked. I was a little bit further back, too much sidewalk here. And what I did instead here was got a little close. So to me, this works a little better at 1.4. And here, there's even a person in the background. There's nice little bokeh balls. But how cool is this lens up close? And here, the newspaper is just a little bit more dramatic, like, we delivered the New York Post, as opposed to before, where it was just a flat kind of newspaper. This works too, but I like the 16 for this. There's a little bit more street in the back, a little bit more interest. Okay, the light was getting nice as we were walking around. This is like street photography, like literally a photograph of the street. And just think about that when you're doing street photography. Sometimes this is a picture of nothing. Yes, maybe it's a historical grab, but make sure that one way you can put interest into your street photography is by adding people. Now, this picture is terrible, by the way, but I just want to tell you my thought process is that here I saw the gentleman walking and there was the walk sign. But again, even with the 56, I couldn't kind of compose the shot well enough. I could crop it in if I wanted to and have him walking with the walk sign and all that. But sometimes with prime lenses, you're limited on what they can give you. But adding a person to a scene usually gives you a little bit more interest. This, by the way, was a fail. Do not chop people's chanclas off. Here with the 56 millimeter street photography, I love. The bokeh is beautiful here at 1.6. But just the second before, I kind of missed. I wanted his reflection here on this glass. But it works for me. It works. And then here, the light started to come up over the buildings. And I got a little trick for you. Here I'm shooting at 1.6. If you stop down your aperture, you get much cooler sun flare and sun stars. Go down to f11, f16, even f22, and you can see what your lens can do if you shoot towards the sun. And so I got this shot here this was mostly about the pigeon. No, I'm just kidding. This was mostly about the sun flare, but I waited for some kind of interest to come in, and this woman was walking by, and she's also breaking the law. And so here it is straight out of camera, and here it is, with the shadows brought out a little bit more. So that light that was coming from behind us was casting this great light, this very bright light on this building here. You could see like the shadow of street light there, and you can see that it's New York over here. But what we did was we sort of waited for people to come into this light. And they weren't all winners. We were kind of waiting for the right person to come through. This is totally blurry. The camera missed there. No, that's a fail there. That's not an interest there. And so you can do this. You can sort of wait for the right person to come through. Sorry, it's not her either. But this was the guy that did it for me. He looked down at us. He had cool sneakers. He had cool style. And to me, this was the best shot of the people that came by. He had the most interest to me. He also had a phone which dates, the what year it is and everything. So it was really cool. Now, this is one of the ones that I was sort of torn about. If I edited the raw file, I mean, to me, he looks cooler. He's got red on. There's a red sign here. The flag is back there, which kind of matches his red, white, and blue action. The street, the trains in New York, the street names, their colors are important in New York. If you take the trains, they all have different colors. So I think this, to me, works a little better in color. So I was a little torn on which works. Black and white, color, black and white, color. And the other thing is most people do black and white of this this type of photography. Okay, and sometimes the 16 is just like way too much information. So here, it's a beautiful old building, so I liked taking a picture of it, but there's just too much going on. Car, person, other place, other sign. And so slapping on the 56 will let you focus and wait for people to go through. this is a very cool shot of two ladies that don't know each other. 16 millimeter, but here perspective is important. Here I'm shooting kind of down on the tire. With the flip screen, I could shoot up at the tire. And so it's a subtle difference, but try to move your camera to somewhere new, somewhere down. And that helps a lot with, giving you a new perspective and a new cool photograph you never thought you could get. Sometimes the photograph, 16 millimeter here, sometimes the photograph is of art, of something else someone has done. But this needed something. Too many humans? Add a human. So sometimes you need a person that comes through in your photograph. Here's one of my favorite people in the whole world, my friend Moe. And again, the Acros film simulation, 16 millimeter 1.4, had him pose a little bit. He looks awesome. Again, perspective. I'm shooting up at him to show he's got power and strength and awesome guns. What are you shooting there, buddy? What is that, a Sony? Oh, Sony. Okay, then I asked this nice gentleman if I could take a portrait of him, 56 millimeter 1.2, but watch your backgrounds. There was another gentleman there trying to get up in the action, and I was like, no. So actually, the photograph, I made him laugh because I'm funny like that. Probably did a Jim Carrey impersonation, and he laughed. But this is the shot that I eventually got. I wanted the light coming through from the smoke in the background. The tones are beautiful. He's beautiful. He's got keys around his neck. I love him. And so I don't like smoking or anything, but smoke is just cool, you gotta admit. And then this is, if you don't like taking pictures of people, which I usually don't, I get like high anxiety, look for tones and shapes. And these are some stairs that I just used the 56 millimeter to capture. And I did edit this one. I added some clarity and grunge and blackened the blacks and whitened the whites. 16 millimeter being way too wide. So this woman was crossing, but it's like just way too wide. Sometimes the 16 millimeter works. Like, for example, this works a little better for me. And sometimes the 56 doesn't work. You need to. The whole point is fill your frame. You want to fill your frame with some kind of interest. And this 56, there's way too much sidewalk here. A person here would have made the photograph, but this is to show you fill your frame. New Yorkers getting their breakfast. These little carts are popular for coffee and bagels. And apparently hot dogs. And then we came up to this scene. So this scene, it's beautiful. Just get up early in New York. There aren't a lot of people. So here, this would be packed later in the day. So I walked up and I saw this one woman. You could see her here. She's sitting alone. And I knew with these umbrellas, I wanted some kind of shot. So I got a shot of her looking off, to the distance, thinking. And so I love this shot. And again, this was one where I was torn between, do I want the color? Because to me, her shirt with the umbrellas and the greens in the back of the windows, I see in color. I'm a color photographer, so this one was hurting me a lot. But it does look pretty in black and white. Maybe if I brought the shadows up a little bit more. And it also worked as a vertical. And so horizontal, vertical is another one of your struggles with a prime lens is what works better. Where there's a foreground element, this little chair balances out. If this was just sidewalk, I probably don't think it would have worked as well. And so all these layers in a vertical photograph work. I don't care that she's in the middle. She's not in a third or anything, but who cares? And it's funny how moments are fleeting in street photography. She went right to her phone and was looking down. And my crop here, this gentleman was, completely in the picture. But the moment is lost. She's not thinking anymore. She's totally just looking at her phone. Now, that was the 56. I slapped on the 16 and I tried to struggle. Can I get a picture with the 16 of the scene? And here it is. To me, it doesn't work. But I wanted to really fight and get it to work. So I started to look around. Here are the guys in the picture. The building is way too big. So I moved around a little bit more. And I ended up getting this with the 16. Where the umbrella really gets rid of the sky and it brings the photograph back. She's still there thinking. She's on her phone, but pretend she's thinking. But again, that's the beauty of walking around with the 16 and the 56. If I had just had the 16, I would be like working the 16. But it was nice to get a photograph with the 56. I could have been just totally done. But then trying it with the 16 and finding a different look, that was awesome. That was really great. Check out my other videos on street photography and other lessons. Subscribe if you haven't, and I love you guys. You just have yourself a good day. Take care then. Bye-bye now.